Well, welcome, grace and peace. My name is JM, and I am the Faith and Justice organizer here at Equality Ohio. My pronouns are they, he, and I'm just excited. I'm so excited to have this conversation because I really think it's something that we have been feeling within our bodies, and we have been in conversations within our communities, and I think it's high time for us to begin to have this conversation together. So thank you for coming. I do appreciate it. Our tech lead is going to be Delaney Barr, pronouns she, her. And if you need any tech related questions, please contact them via the chat. And if you have questions for our panelists or presenters, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. So we're going to get started with the introduction of our panelists today. I am going to attempt to introduce you all. I might butcher your name, blame it to my head and not my heart. I just have a hard time with names. I never forget your face, but you might be like, I remember you. So I'm going to introduce you, and I just want you to say, a little bit about yourself, really quick, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. I got to put preachers and faith leaders on time limits because we like to talk. 1 to 2 minutes. And while our panelists are introducing themselves, continue to put your name, pronouns, and your affiliation in the chat because we're just going to have a conversation. So I want you to get comfortable with that chat so that we can have dialogue. Okay? So I'm going to start off first with Miss Paisha Thomas. Then I'm going to go to Delphin, and then Guy, and finally Drew. We'll go in that order. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me today. I am Paisha Thomas, and I am Racial Justice Campaign Coordinator with Faith and Public Life. And my job is around defunding police and building community services that money would be best used for.
Hello, everyone. My name is Delfin or Delfin. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, or ellos. I'm joining you all from Athens, Ohio, and I am on the Vision Council, which is an alternative to a board of directors for an organization called Call to Action, which is a progressive Catholic social justice organization.
Good afternoon. Okay, let me stop trying to be formal. Hey, y'all. Listen, my name is the Reverend Guy Johnson. I am the interim pastor of the North Congregational United Church of Christ in Columbus, Ohio. I'm just happy to be here today, so thanks.
And I think that's me. If not, it's probably not the first or last time I've been out of line, so I apologize. Y'all, my name is Drew Tucker. I'm the university pastor, director for the Center for Faith and Learning at Capital University. I use he, him pronouns, and I am just so grateful to be a part of this conversation today and appreciate the work that Equality Ohio is doing to make these conversations happen and raise the profile and importance of this. So looking forward to it with y'all.
Now, can you see why I am so excited about the conversation we are about to have? I am just overjoyed. Thank you so much for answering my call and being a part of this. I do appreciate your voice, and I'm glad you're in the room. So I just want to point this panel and this conversation into the direction of stigma. As we converse here today, I want all of us to think about how we can come up against stigma and reduce trauma in all of our communities, especially the faith community. So I'm just going to jump right in, and I'm going to pick a person. I got 4 or 5 questions. So if you have any more questions, be sure to put them in the chat, and our tech lead will get them to me, and we can get them answered if we have time. But I have about 4 questions that was presented on the Hoover app, and I think that these are excellent questions to start us off in some rich dialogue. So if you're ready, y'all got your water. Make sure you hydrate. I also want to put a caveat here. Make sure that you take care of yourself. There will be times where trauma will come up for all of us. Respond to that in healthy ways. If you need to stand up, if you need to breathe, if you need to say something of construct in the chat, we do appreciate all of those things, but we want to make sure that you take care of yourself because this is a place of healing, and this is the job that we are called to do as faith leaders. So let's go. So the first question here that I want to lift up here is, what are some of the ways that stigma plays out in society and how it shows up in groups? and the impact thereof. I'm going to start it off. But Paisha, go ahead and start this off, and then we'll just pop in like popcorn until we get to the next question.
Sure. The first thing that I can think of as a person who grew up in a Black apostolic denomination church is that in the Black Christian world, evangelical specifically, there's just a misrepresentation and a misunderstanding of Scripture that has caused non-cis, non-straight, non-hetero human beings to be ostracized. The stigma in this case is that this is a sin, and so just the sort of excommunication and the trying to deliver people from who they are has just really messed with the identities and the human development of people. I'm glad that my grandkids, that I have found a way away from that world in a time that my grandkids can live out their true identities on this earth, because I think that stigma causes a lot of hiding, and it causes a lot of internal, just a lot of self-hatred, and I think that's where I'm at with stigma, at least in the Black church.
Well, Paisha, thank you for saying that. I come out of more of a mainline background, and it's interesting. When we talk about stigma, one of the things that always comes to my mind first is how the Black church, in particular, will pimp out a gift on a Sunday morning. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson said it this way: our gay brothers specifically are asked to sign their theological death warrants Sunday after Sunday. The pastor gets up, preaches a 45-minute to 1 hour sermon excoriating the sins of the world, and heaps coals of fire on homosexuality. And then during the most sacred moment in the service, the invitation to discipleship, the choir director, who's gay, nods at the musician, who's gay, and 9 times out of, and about, I'm not gonna say 9 times, about 50% of the time, they send up the best male soloist in the choir, who's gay, and they ask him to sign off on this foolishness that the pastor just did. And the hiding of relationship that goes on with that tears down the soul. For example, everybody knows that the soloist and the pianist are god brothers, and they live together, or they are uncle and nephew, in an attempt to legitimize a relationship that should be legitimate anyway. That's kind of where it starts out for me.
Yeah, and I think it also then that becomes an unhealthy thing, right? Like, this is not your uncle. You are not sleeping with your uncle. So stop. But in the chat, I put that thing about the meme. Did y'all see that meme going around? I died when I saw that.
That is true.
It is so true. There was a couple in our church. They were just needed to, the one person just needed to have a place to stay for till they got on their feet, and that was 20 some years ago. And they're still roommates, and I feel bad for them because they just really can't live out loud, and they're trying to live what's considered to be a saved life, and they're just out here living dishonest. And like,
it's funny you say that. So I've been married and with my husband for 16 years, and I was in a 9.5-year relationship before that. And my former partner's mother loved me, I loved her. But in an attempt to legitimize and explain who I was, she would introduce me as her nephew. Now, I was insulted, and I told her, I was like, please stop introducing me as your nephew, because everybody in the world knows that I sleep with your son every night. Let's just be honest about this. So now you making us an incestuous couple. That's nasty.
Right.
Stop.
Right.
Now you got me sleeping with my cousin. Stop.
Right.
That's nasty. Ew, ew. But again, we are as healthy as our deepest secret. And unfortunately, the Black, and I can talk about the Black church with expertise because I come out of it. We will celebrate a lie in order to not tell the truth.
Yes.
And we have to get past that. And I'm gonna also say this. I also have only served primarily white congregations. Just because they ain't of color don't mean the same thing doesn't happen in these congregations as well.
That's definitely true. Thank you for bringing that part up, especially. Definitely, I saw you unmute. Did you want to have a comment on this question as well?
Yeah, I mean, I echo and share a lot of the sentiments that have been shared, and the whole notion of sin. Growing up in a Christian household, primarily a Catholic household, as a trans person, the stigma is that I don't exist. Many Christian traditions, many religious traditions don't recognize trans people today. Historically, that's a whole different conversation. But today, trans people aren't on the radar. And so there is a lot of silence. And so when it comes to church, who I am as a trans person, not just as a queer person, is invisible. And where do I find community? Where do I find connection if who I am isn't created in the image of God because I don't exist? And the silence and pain that causes.
But Delfin, I'm going to give you, so I have these conversations with Black preachers a lot. So one of the things I always say is, you have to be made in the image of God. Because if you read the Genesis text, it uses plural pronouns and plural possessives. Let us make people in our own image. And if you exist, you have to be made in the imago Dei. So while people may not want to acknowledge you, know that God does, and I know you know that already, but a whole lot of us who are here in the world celebrate, acknowledge you can, baby, you can't be invisible, you cannot not exist because you're fabulous. And we see that. Sorry, let me stop.
I love it. Before we move on, I'm gonna say Dr. Drew. Pastor Drew, did you have a comment on that? But we can move on to another question and come back if you need to.
Well, I do want to say two quick things. One is I co-signed the idea that I cannot speak for life in the Black church, but let me tell you, I'm a member of the ELCA, which is not intentionally, but really the whitest denomination in the United States of America. And by the way, when we were formed in 1987, we said we were going to be 10% back then diverse, right? By 20 years in, we got more white since 1987. So we're doing great there. And by great, I mean awful. And I just, that phrase again, we will praise a lie to avoid that hard truth. My goodness. And that happens so much around issues of race, so much around issues of sexuality, gender identity, so much around issues even of our own complicity in those things. And I think that's the other thing that's important, is that one of the ways that trauma happens is this lie of universal normalcy, that like what's normal for me should be normal for you too. Like we all have something that normalizes ourselves, and that's fine, but that doesn't have to be normal for everyone. In fact, it's a whole lot better if it's not. And so that kind of presumption of universal normalcy, that is a source of trauma for all sorts of people. And we ignore that, and we'd like to praise it rather than deal with the reality of diversity.
That was so good. That was because, listen, that was good. We have to, we have to say that again because I want folks to get it to put it on Twitter. That's a good place to turn to your neighbor moment and put that on Twitter.
I'm sure I said something. So what I said was, I think we presume universal normalcy. And if we presume what's normal for me is normal for someone else, that is a major source of trauma.
That's the real.
That'll preach.
We grow up in silos and we say that all of these things are monoliths. So when we talk about Christianity, we put that as a monolith, that we all act alike and we all look alike. And that's the source of our problems, because it is the diversity that brings strength, because now we can see more. Jonathan Tomadow talks about circling the elephant. We can see more of the elephant when we have different perspectives of what we're touching. Because if we're only touching a leg, we think that leg is a tree. Or we think that leg, and we say, this is God. This is what God is. This is what we should worship. But the truth of the matter is, you don't have the full picture anyway. So if we take a beat back and we ask questions about, what does God look like to you? What does divinity look like to you? What does it mean not to worship God? What does it mean not to be a non-theist? And how can I, as one who believes in an anthropomorphic God, still have conversations with you about who is someone who does not believe that they need any relationship with an outside source? That's what diversity brings us. So thank you for that. Did y'all get the tweet out? Tweet that and put that hashtag on there. We're going to jump to another question real quick. Devin, I see that you unpaused, but if you give me a second, I want to touch some of these other questions that probably will bridge some gaps. So there's a question here that says, what are the current stigmas impacting our communities, each of our intersections that is on this panel, and how does that stigma play out in the world? And we talked a little bit about it. And what do we do when each of these groups that are dealing with the stigma is marginalized or less resourced and do not have the voice to switch that narrative? Anybody jump in?
There's a lot of silence, and JM, yes, we can question, we can ask questions, we can try to explore faith and spirituality from multiple different perspectives, but a lot of us have grown up in houses, have grown up in communities, cultures, and churches where asking questions is not allowed, and where whatever the authority figure says is what it is. As a Latinx person, we talk a lot with our feelings, we talk with our hands, we can be loud, but when it comes to questions and stories around sexuality and gender, silence. And then to add on top of that Christianity, specifically Catholicism, even more silence. And so we grow up in a world where we are not allowed to question, and where the true fear of hell is tangible and instilled into us. And a lot of that comes from fear, and we can get into the hierarchy and all that other fun stuff. That's a whole other talk. But I think the silence, and as we know from ACT UP and other groups, silence equals death. And a lot of folks are suffering in silence because we don't have places where we can ask questions, because we're taught questioning is bad, being different is bad, you need to conform, period.
Silence equals death, even in the church. Silence equals death, even in the church.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm in a side chat here that I wanted to just kind of lift up to the front. The new, or we have learned over time that the Bible, when it spoke about who man should not lay with, had nothing to do with another consenting man. It was about pedophilia, and the irony that is soaking on that thing when there's so much egregious child abuse, sexual abuse, rape, sexual assault, and even in hetero relationships where this goes into misogyny and all kinds of other things, but where the spouse is considered to be property. I think that is there's just so much convolution in there, and I think that silence is what keeps it like that. Like in my church, my cousin was molested by my uncle, and they just kept that so quiet. So he was allowed to keep molesting people because he was up in the church around all these children, and people didn't know, so they would trust their kids around them. Um, and so just being quiet about what the real issues is and trying to like laud this other issue as some kind of distraction, I think is really dangerous.
So, again, Paisha, I don't know how you all up in my brain and all up in my story. But so the church that my family comes out of, we had a youth minister that in hindsight was grooming me. And when I hit a certain age, he dumped me for his next victim. And I went through about 3 years. What's wrong with me? I thought he loved me. That kind of foolishness. Now, 30 years later, I realized exactly what was going on, and I had to forgive myself because I thought that I had done something wrong. The thing is, the folk in the church knew what was going on. Let me not say it that way. No. Let me not condemn everybody. The old ladies knew what was going on because they know everything. But once when I was about 30, I told an older friend about it, and he was absolutely livid. He was like, "I should go punch." I was like, "No, I don't need you to go punch him in his mouth. I got this." But once the secret was out, it was this, oh my God, how did we let this happen to multiple children? Because he was a pastor. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when we start talking about what the Bible says about same-sex, same-gendered relationships, we have to remember that the Bible was written, at least Guy Johnson's theology says, the Bible was written so that the people of God, Israel, could explain why they were where they were, or, how did we get here? And last Sunday, and a couple of days ago, I preached the story of David and Jonathan and how Jonathan loved David. We can't necessarily say that David loved Jonathan, but what we can say is based on the words in the text and how it is constructed. For me, I said, well, it looks like that was a marriage ceremony because of what Jonathan does. And people, I've had non-queer people say, you have made this, a gay story. And I'm like, no, it's not a gay story. I'm just reading the words as they are. But it is what it is. And I followed it up with, I do weddings primarily. Weddings are my side gig. I love doing weddings. And about half of the weddings, especially straight ones, people want me to read the quote, where you go, I go, your people shall be my people, your God shall be my God. And I say to them, you do realize, of course, that is a conversation between two women. So you are lifting up a conversation about loyalty, fidelity, dedication, life companionship from two women. Know what you're getting into. About 50% of the time they go, oh my God, I never thought of it like that. It's like, maybe you should. So I really believe that we can find ways to lift up healthy, same-gendered relationships that come out of Scripture. Now, the David Jonathan thing is a little hinky because David, I got my own opinions about David, but we can find those relationships.
I want to lift up a resource out there. There's a book called Sacred Word, Broken Word. It comes out of an evangelical tradition. It's not without its faults for sure, but one of the valuable pieces of it is that it lifts up the reminder that the Bible is not God, and it goes through the reality that the Bible is intended to point to God, and even though it's divinely inspired, it's communicated through human hands, right, through human perspectives. And so there's no way understanding that it could be perfect. So we're going to have issues, mistakes, faults, disagreements, dissonance, even within the text itself. which I can find a helpful reminder that there are even those marks within the text that we have to deal with that aren't clear, right? That we have looked at the Bible one way. We've ignored the fact that Ruth is saying this to Naomi, and we're like, oh, that's not who I think she should be saying it to. Well, maybe you should pay attention a little closer and see what's up. The other thing that I want to, I guess the mark I want to connect is that I think it's not an accident that stigma and stigmata are so close together. And though I don't come out of the Catholic tradition, the reality is that a stigma is something that somebody else puts on us, that they use to shame us, that they use to try to literally mark us. And the stigmata are the marks of the crucifixion that Jesus went through, that others put on him. And so I have this kind of difficult relationship with the crucifixion story and how it's used, because I think understood rightly, that is an understanding of God walking alongside us in trauma, that God will not abandon us in trauma. Understood wrongly, that is this redemptive suffering that is using suffering, that God's going to force suffering, that you had to suffer. And that's just poison upon poison. And so I mostly want to raise that up as I'm confused too, and I'm supposedly supposed to know what I'm talking about. But I really think that the reminder on that end of the stigmas that are on us, we are not alone in those, that we walk in those with others and we walk in those with God. And that's a healthy reminder. But as soon as it becomes a manipulative or coercive kind of suffering, that is not of God, right? Like that is anything but.
You segue perfectly in the question that came up for me, in that we can see now, as we're watching this panel, that we are not without our own personal trauma experiences within the same institution that we are now champions for. And to speak very transparently, I have struggled with that as of late. I have asked, what is the reason why I am doing this, and have I taken on something that is too much for me as a Black, queer, non-binary, evangelical raised, Pentecostal believing church person and leader? How do I do this? Is that do we have here like some of those moments that we brush up against some stuff and we're just like, I can do something easier. I can do something that. And why do we stay? Why do we stay? Can we talk about that a little bit?
The call is great. There are many days I wake up and say, I can go back to corporate America, and I can put this same tie, shirt, and suit on, and make 2.5 times what I make right now, and not have to deal with everybody and their opinions, their issues, and their isms. I could do that, but I know that's not what I'm supposed to do. I know what I'm called to do, and I have to. This is what I know how to do, despite all of the foolishness that goes along. Because there's a lot of foolishness that goes along with it. But I know who I am and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so once I got that, it made it easier to deal with the difficulties in ministry. The other part of it is I've had to learn healthy boundaries and how to unplug and say, enough is enough. Or, that, not my circus, not my monkey. And when I realize it's not my circus and not my monkeys, I learn how to distance myself. And that takes a whole lot of time and healing to get to. Because a lot of us believe we're Superman, Superwoman. A lot of us believe we Jesus Jr. And it's like, when Drew said stigmata, I ain't got no holes in my hands and I ain't got no hole in my side. So I'm not Jesus Jr.
Jesus.
But think about it, we believe that thing. But we have to learn that Guy Johnson theology, only one got crucified and I believe was resurrected. And his name is not Guy Johnson. So I've had to learn how to let the stuff go that I'm not tasked to do. You know, it is not my job. It is not my job to take on all the suffering in the world, and I know what I'm supposed to do. And we have to learn that as we do this thing.
I want to pull a different perspective. I want to hear from someone who is not parish ministry, someone who is not in ministry but has a faith lens. What does this look like to stay in a problematic place, and you are representing this place in a traumatized environment, like you're in the queer community with this name tag on? Yeah, definitely. I want to hear from you. That sounds good from you.
I think a lot of it stems from being able to reclaim things on my terms, and that by asking questions, by challenging faith traditions, that doesn't make me any less of a person of faith or a person of spirit. It allows me to engage faith and claim it and reclaim it. We often talk about in Christian circles that God is awesome, God is beyond our understanding, yet we narrow God to white man with a beard sitting on a cloud. And it wasn't until my 20s that I was like, oh my gosh, Jesus wasn't white. Why am I, why is Mary blonde hair, blue-eyed, white skin? But that is the image that we're given. And so to see God as queer, to see Jesus as bisexual, to see Jesus as asexual, to talk about Jesus as intersex, because where did that Y chromosome come from if he didn't have a biological father? To look at God as grandma with la chancla who needs to hit you upside the head sometimes, or as lover, being able to really take God out of the box has been liberating and transformative, and has given me the opportunity to look at my own faith tradition as well as other faith traditions, and to find queerness and queerness as celebrated and holy. And that's the reason I stay. They try to push me out, but they can't. And so being able to journey myself and journey with others with a reclaiming a faith on our terms. And the questions that we ask may not have answers, but the fact that we're able to ask questions is a form of liberation and is a form of revolution. And so that's why I stay.
You said a word. Can we get some reactions? If that touched you right there, can you just put a clapping sign reaction or something? Because that's why I'm here. Because there's a people that is connected to me that may not have the words or the ability to be in that room that I can be in, that my skin has afforded me the ability to be in, that my privilege have given me the strength to have, because I wasn't beat down because of this one thing, because I had this privilege of presenting in a certain way. That can now be the catalyst for change, because it is now my job to open the door for the other voices to come in and to speak. It's my job to hold space at the table until someone that needs to talk can have the ability to talk. That, when I tell you, you might not know nothing about the Pentecostal church, but I almost ran through this room because that resonated so deeply within me. That vibrated all of my energy. That's what I want to do. That's what community building is all about.
I think just existing too. I don't think you have to Guy's point, I don't think you have to always be the one doing the work. I mean, take a nap, take a vacation, take a break, and live your life. Because some choir director, I'm thinking of a person right now from my home church. I'm from Piqua, Ohio, so it's also a rural Ohio where people aren't allowed to be free. But this person would look at you and hope to be you one day, because they're stifled. They're struggling to just, and we all see it. We're all just like, come on, you can do it. But they need more examples. They need more examples of someone who can cut a step and still love who they want to love. Someone who can bring down the house in a sermon and still love who they love. So just existing and being who you are is gonna encourage and inspire somebody, and it's not all up to you. Everybody has their own part, so get you a break.
I think Laverne Cox often talks about how our existence, our daily existence, is a form of resistance because we're told that we shouldn't exist. And so just going about our day, going to the grocery store, going to work, going to a church service, is revolution, is resistance. Yes, going to protests, yes, going to rallies, signing petitions, and all that stuff is fun and great, but just being this frumpy, queer, trans, balding individual and going about Athens, going to Chipotle, going to Kroger, that's revolution, and that is resistance, because again, we're told that we shouldn't exist, and so it's exciting. And yes, naps are important, and we need to take breaks because, as Audre Lorde says, that's also part of the revolution. Self-care is a form of warfare, and so yeah, I'm starting to ramble.
So it's interesting that, so I always tell people, so moment of transparency, I turned 50 last week. And I grew up in, yes, I grew up in Southeast Washington, D.C. And I grew up during the AIDS crisis in Washington, D.C. And poor little black boys from the hood who are queer and not exactly masculine, who have daddies who were football players, are not supposed to survive. My mere existence is an act of resistance and revolution. The fact that I survived, there was a point where at one point I was going to a funeral a week for people who had lost their lives to the AIDS scourge. So the fact that I was able to not just get through that undiagnosed, uninfected, because I was stupid. You know, we're all grown people. Let's just tell some truth. I wasn't exactly always good in what I did, but the fact that I was able to survive was an act of resistance. And now you can't make me turn around. And one of the things that we were talking about was, how does HIV come into this? Because we ask people, even today, how did they get it? If they disclose their serial status, how did they get it? Well, we know how they got it. But we don't ask a smoker who smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, how did you get lung cancer? You know, or any other cancer. It's they have cancer, let's pray. So the stigma around sexuality and serial status in conjunction with being at church just makes me crazy some days. And so now that I'm rambling, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna pass it over to Drew.
Before Drew jumps in, that is a perfect example of how stigma informs our society, right? Because HIV laws are felonious assault charges based upon the stigma that was in the 80s that said that HIV is a death sentence and that these are pariahs to the society and they are dirty and they are unclean. And so these are where the stigma has created laws, yes, laws that stemmed from the conversation from the place that should have been the healing. We should have been the healing place because that's our MO. And then we question why people have lost faith in what we believe is the church. It's because we are not living up to the standards in which we put out for others to live. We were supposed to be the healing place. We're still supposed to be the healing place. But we become the place that gives the most trauma. We give so much trauma that they've made a trauma disorder in our name, which is the church. It's supposed to be a place of healing. Pastor Drew, did you have something to say?
Well, so I feel like I have something to say, but I also think I need to name 3,000-pound white elephant in the room. Namely, I carry a lot of privilege in my body, right? So I have a very different experience with why I stay. That's not that I have not experienced stigma or had struggle or, gone through deconstruction. By the way, another resource that's out there, there's a new progressive devotional called the Deconstructionist Playbook. It's from our Bible app. It's run by women of color. It's real great. I stay for two reasons. Primarily, one, because of that privilege, I can be in places and say stuff and not have the same consequences. So, for instance, in worship last year, we read selections of Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise, which details the church's complicity with racism. We read those like scriptures in worship. We read them alongside the gospel each week. I know that I could only get away with that because I had the privilege and I was playing those social chips, right? Like I was putting them on the table and I was like, y'all are going to do this with me for a semester and we're going to hear it and then we're going to preach about it and then we're going to talk about it and then we're going to hopefully understand better. And the other reason, honestly, so I got to be honest, I'm here because people still ask me. Like I told my wife when JM asked me to be a part of this, told her what I was doing and she's like, they want you? And I was like, it's a real good question, but I'm going to show up because I was asked to show up, right? And so really part of my theology, if an internal and external call is, like, if someone asks me to show up and I feel that I have something to offer, I'll show up under that leadership because that's part of, I think, faithfulness is to come and be a part when I'm asked, but also to shut up when I'm not and to step back when I'm not, because I don't need to be the leader all the time. I don't need to be at the center all the time. So those are the two big pieces that keep me showing up.
I will admit that I had ulterior motive in bringing you, Drew. And the motive is I want to show what queerness really looks like. Right? Because queerness is not about who I love or how I present. Queerness is the term that we reclaimed, right? That we reclaimed, and it says that I am out of the box. I am not constrained by your ideals of what society would make me to be. I am who I am because I have done the work to be who I am, right? And I believe that the church really needs to lean into what it means to be abnormal. We talk about it a lot, especially with my persuasion, my background, where it is that we are in the world and not of the world. That's our mantra. That's what calls holiness people to look at you with a side eye and a contempt in your face when you are a female presenting, assumed to be a woman not wearing a skirt. That's the presentation in which they operate their lives. So we come from a place where we should understand what it means to be abnormal in what is considered a normal society, but we have, out of fear, have allowed ourselves to be constrained to a type of image that does not look like the one in which we're saying we're the benefactor of. It doesn't look like Jesus. And so if it doesn't even look like Jesus, we definitely can't talk about a conversation about if it looks like God.
I think we don't have time today to even peel that open because the race and the LGBT community is such a busy intersection. We wish that marginalized people could not marginalize other people, but we do that. As it relates to police, we had a former chief of police in Columbus who is lesbian and deeply racist and allowed for the perpetuation of Black people being murdered by police in Columbus. So there's so much to talk about around race and in this intersection. We might need another panel for that, but that's a big one.
Definitely. This is just trying to whet the appetite because we talk about this stuff, right? We wrestle with these things. We wrestle with how to have conversations because we are the intercede. We are one who is interceding between two sometimes binary thought process, right? That are they right or are they wrong? And it's a lot more in there. There's some work that needs to be done. in there. So there's a couple of questions, and I apologize. I was moving this rather quickly, and it is because one of our panelists do have to drop off. And I just wanted to give a thank you so much for your perspective. And I wish, and we definitely need to have this again. So I will be reaching out to you. But if we can give a thank you to Paisha as she travels into her next place, I thank you for being here and your rich conversation. It's really appreciated.
Thank you so much. I wish I didn't have to go into my next thing, but I'm gonna go over there and work on the mobile crisis alternate response to police. So we'll just keep up the good work, everybody. Thank you again.
This is the work, and we thank you for being who you are. And we'll talk soon. So, once again, as we take this brief pause here, if you have any questions, please drop them in the questions and answers down at the bottom. We would definitely want to lift those questions up that are coming up as we're having these conversations. Also, we are tweeting, so if you want to pull up your Twitter on your mobile device, and when we hear a quote that we really like, go ahead and tweet it with the hashtags Ohio Faith and Fiercely Forward. So here's another question we have, and it says, what are some of the ways we can educate ourselves against stigmatization, and whether it is specific to our particular intersections, and how does that work? Definitely, let's start with you, if you would, if that's okay, with an answer to how can we educate ourselves against that stigmatization.
I think first and foremost is being aware of it within ourselves. And as woke as we would like to claim to be woke is a constant state of awakening. You never sort of reach an endpoint, because there's always something new to learn and a place to grow. And so recognizing our own biases, recognizing our own prejudices, because we have them. And as much as we like to say we don't, we do. When I moved to Athens, Ohio from Miami, Florida, there were a lot of unconscious things that I didn't realize I had against rural America, living in Appalachia, that I had to first recognize, admit to, and process. And yes, there are some truths in that, but there are a lot of untruths, and there is a lot of resilience, diversity, and fierceness and queerness in Appalachia that I didn't know existed. And so I think first and foremost is sort of doing our own work, and recognizing that as we do our own work, we're constantly going to be learning, and we're constantly going to be growing. And then secondly, as Drew shared, sometimes we need to shut up and listen. And even as a queer person of color, as a trans person of color, sometimes I need to shut up and listen to others, and recognize where I enter spaces with privilege, and be in solidarity with others. Working at a university for 6 years, listening to students and recognizing that students are leaders and professionals, not just as the future, but in the right now. And listening to their experiences, and shutting up myself to learn from them and to grow with them and from them. And so again, I think it's sort of addressing these things within ourselves and listening to others.
I'm sorry, I was trying to tweet that last comment, that the students are the professionals not only of the future but right now. I was trying to get that. So if y'all want to put that on your Twitter, that listen, that there was a meme that I saw on social media that said, if you are a 45 and above and do not have a mentor that's under 30, a mentor, not a mentee, you are missing something. And even in my personal life, that's a place that I recognize that I didn't have the viewpoint. I didn't know what it was to be on a different place outside of my intersections. I don't know what it is for this next generation to see the church. What do they see the church as? What are we doing that is speaking to them? Because I think that sometimes we are speaking so loudly to ourselves that it becomes a selfish thing, and we forget that there are people coming behind us that need to have the same place to get the same experience, to be the same type of person that will put a space in place for the next generation, right? And if we stop that cycle and stop thinking about ourselves for a moment and about how we feel and about how we want to show up in a community, then we can leave space for those who will build this church into what it needs to be, not what it used to be. Right?
Can we tweet that? I know James is calling us to tweet other things, but like what we need to be, not what we used to be, right? Like that is the thing. We do not need to be what we used to be, right? There is good in that, that's awesome, but not all of it. There's a whole lot of bad that belongs nowhere. Not just belongs in the past, but it never belonged in the first place. And so we gotta live that for sure.
You were talking about that deconstruction, about having to go through that process of deconstruction. Can we talk about a little bit about that? Like, what does that feel like? How can we continue in the process? Because I will admit, it took about 4 years for me to figure out that God did not want me to go to hell. And I actually walked away from the church a couple of times during that process. How can we more healthy, because I would admit that wasn't healthy really for me, but how can we do that without having to come up against these crises of faith that are so traumatic that they almost blow us completely out of our purpose?
So this is just one piece that I have found, which is really getting back to an older understanding of the difference between identity and vocation, and maybe not even older understanding, but a clarifying understanding, because so often we identify our work as our identity, and that's just not the case, right? Like there is significant overlap at times, but it's not the same thing. And so sometimes when we leave work, when students in my arena, when students change majors, all of a sudden they feel like they've lost their identities, when in fact they're just called to different work. And so part of that is that we need to help people understand that we are called to different things at different times, and yet you are still beloved by God. You are still a holy, wonderfully made individual, that you still have the sacred purpose that was with you before and will be with you after. And so that idea that your identity and vocation are different, there's overlap, but they're different, I think can be real lifesaver literally a lifesaver for people, especially with depression and anxiety, with mental illness on continued tear. We need to keep that differentiation pretty clear if we're gonna persevere through the deconstruction and then hopefully reconstruction and liberation out of that process.
So that sounds like grace to me. The other preachers, spiritual leaders on here, but that sounds like we are giving grace even to ourselves to be able to be in the unknown place, to be able to be like Elijah in the cave and said, I'm by myself, but there's 5,000 that haven't bowed. You're not by yourself. You're going through a rough time, but you're not alone. Like, guy, I saw you unmute. What? Come on, bring it to me.
So two things. Number one, Drew, my God, that was a word. And it took me about 20 years to understand that what I do is not who I am. Number two, JM, you said something, it took you 4 years to figure out God didn't want you to go to hell. I go back to, we still are asked to sign our theological death warrant at the end of service. We are sheep being led to the slaughter, a theological slaughter. So, because I'm a couple years older than you, I'm gonna own that. My saving grace was I was a singer, and as a singer, you get they give you a pass. He is artistic, so and I had to convince I had to learn for myself that if I was going to hell, number one, I was going to love everybody. I was going to love the hell out of everybody on the way. And number two, if I'm going to hell, I'm going to bust hell wide open, and then I'm going to hell heights because I'm not a commoner. So we'll start there. I tell people, you can't scare me with hell. I've lived in hell. I've lived through hell. So trying to scare me with hell, you got to come better than that. But also with that, I am the child. I am the descendant of several generations of English teachers. So words are my currency. And I always take it back to the text. And the text said in, I want to say John 3:16, for God so loved the world that God gave God's only begotten Son, that whomsoever believeth in the Son should not perish, but have everlasting life. Now, the word whosoever means all y'all plus one. Everybody. Nobody's excluded. So if Jesus said that nobody was excluded, who are you to try to put me in hell? A hell that you don't have to put me in. So you can use that all y'all plus one. I give it to you.
I got it. I grew up in a profession. We learned how to preach from an apprentice style. So we got on the ground. When we told the pastor, I feel the call to preach, the pastor said, "Okay, we'll get you a sermon because you're preaching Sunday." And it's like okay. So we had to be on the ground running. I was gonna have to ring that bell on you, but because you was preaching, and I know when a preacher gets to preaching, get up in there. Get up, because I do it. Somebody tap me on the shoulder. You're not preaching right now, but
I know, but it got good to me. So.
And I'm all right with that. This conversation, I just want to lift up again the beautiful conversation that we're having here, and this is important. The deconstruction of our faith is important. The realization whether you need faith or not. And as a faith leader, as a preacher, as a bishop, that is definitely detrimental for me to say that. But there are people who don't need faith, and that is also faith. Now,
yes.
I'm glass up so I can see you real good. You don't need faith. Is also not needing faith,
right?
Because there is a belief that this is well. It is well with my soul, the way it is. And so when I talk to people and they say I'm not a Christian, I'm like,
okay,
you might be smart about that, because we dealing with some problems right now. We trying to work it out, but there's some conversations we still having. So if you don't need this, what can we do together, right? I think that modernity and that thought is necessary, because either we navigate it, go back to the basics, or do something new, or we lose all of it. And as faith leaders or people of faith, there is an element of this that is healing or helpful to us, which is why we're still there. Or as we heal, we realize we don't need it, and that's the conversation that we need to have. But if you are here for a reason, we don't want to lose this place because someone is coming here for a reason. But we got to make sure that the water is not polluted. How do we make sure that the water is not polluted?
By taking our own agendas out of it. We all have an agenda of some sort. We have to take us out of it. We got to, what I believe as a Christian pastor in a Christian denomination, that is my lens. But when it comes to doing, because I always say, because when you asked me, I was like, you want me there? You sure? So I look at it from my lens. However, when it comes to other people's faith, that's not my business. I go back to, I don't have a heaven to put you in or a hell to keep you out of. I got to work out my own soul salvation with fear and trembling, no matter what that looks like. So I just, so I always tell people, if you ask me to come, know that I'm Jesus-centric. I love me some Jesus. We've been in this affair for 45 years. He my dude. But at the end of the day, your faith life is your faith life. I don't have the ability, nor do I want to tell you how to live your faith. Now, when you come into 2040, that's a whole different issue. But in doing this work, baby, do you. Whatever your definition of faith is, do you. My question is, like you said, how can we walk and work together? All the rest of it is secondary for me.
I think for me, it's being able to show folks, to quote again the great Laverne Cox, that it's not about being a role model, it's about being a possibility model, that folks can see possibility in how we live our lives. And so as a person who has a theological background but has worked in quote unquote secular spaces, there has been a fear that I'm going to come in proselytizing, baptizing folk. And it's just like, no, I'm here to present alternatives. I'm here to present options. And what folks do with it is what folks do with it. It's not about imposing or proselytizing. It's been exciting for folks to rediscover faith and religion, but it's also been powerful for folks to be like, you know what? This is not for me, and I'm going to go on my merry way. And that's just as powerful and great. The other piece of that is also recognizing that, yes, I may be in the secular world, whatever that means, but that the work that I do is still a form of ministry. I may not be in a pulpit on Sundays, but when a person is sitting across from me saying that they are considering suicide and need support, that's a pulpit. That's a form of ministry. That is sanctuary. And so I see a lot of the advocacy work that I do as ministry, which has not always been well accepted by folks who have a congregation and preach on a pulpit every Sunday. That ministry is narrowly defined. And so I think part of this work and part of the destigmatization of religion is also recognizing that ministry is not, that church is not limited to just the building of a congregation, but can be lived out in the world in many, many different ways.
Delphine, I know that I can't meet all the needs of the people that are a part of our university, a part of our congregation. So like continue that ministry, and all those pastors, teachers, deacons, bishops who ignore that, like kick the dust off and keep working, right? Like that's what's needed. JM, you asked the question, like, how do we make the water clean again? How do we, so of course, you know, I've spent way too many months in Bible classes, right? And so my mind's back in Exodus, right? So the Israelites come to Mara and the water's bitter. And what do? They complain, right? That, this is awful. What do we do? Then Moses finds a tree, right? Like finds a stick, throws it in the water, and it's clean. And so part of me wonders, like, what are our natural resources around us that we can put to use to clean up the water? What are the things that are in our environment that we can put in the pond to clean this mess up, that we're ignoring because like, oh, that won't work. Like that's not possible. Of course it's not possible. It's not possible for a dude to rise from the dead either. But guess what? That's what at least some of us are believing and working and talking on. So maybe we try the impossible too and see if there's something else that can be done, because we know it needs to be cleaned up for us to drink. So let's put that water back to clean.
Sir, that I preached a sermon about that very story, right? And then I talked about Psalms 1 and said you should be as a tree planted by the rivers of water. You should bring forth your fruit, and your leaves should not wither, and whatsoever you do should prosper. And then I went to New Testament where Jesus, when Jesus laid hands on the blind man said, "I see men as trees." And I was asking Spirit, what to do with that. And Spirit told me, and I said, that sometimes we need to be the tree that is thrown into the water to purify the water. And that sometimes when we are standing in the midst of all this chaos, that us being grounded within who we are can be that life-giving force that will change the very environment in which we are now in. And we can become the life in the dead situation as long as we stay grounded. Because if we become ungrounded, we become like Peter when saw the waves in the water. Y'all know the story. If you don't, it's a nice story. You can take it or leave it. But it works for me because every moment that I step outside of a place of fear because of my trauma, because I just came out as non-binary, and I don't know what a Pentecostal queer preacher looks like as non-binary, wearing his hair with this collar. I don't know how to navigate in the world this way because it hasn't been done before in my life, but I'm willing to do it because I feel it has to be done. So I'm stepping out of this boat and I'm wondering if I'm going to sink. I think that it's high time that we have to admit as leaders that we struggle. As queer leaders, we have doubts because the system in which we're trying to bring healing to causes pain sometimes for us. And if we are honest about that, I believe that the queer community needs honesty in order to be okay with the feelings that they feel about it, yet the attraction and longing for the spirituality or for the community or for whatever we have. So this last question, and I want each one of you to answer if you can, what do we do next? What do we do next?
I don't know. I'm not that smart. What I do know is we said that the youth are not the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today. We have to let those who are younger than us tell us how we should go forward. You know, one of the drawbacks of the civil rights movement is the soldiers and the leaders of the civil rights movement don't want to get out of the way for the next generation to come behind them. Because I do everything from a faith perspective. There are pastors who needed to retire 25 years ago who won't get out of the way. I don't know what we should do, but I am smart enough to listen to those kids who are younger than me, who are young enough to be my child, and let them tell me where we need to go, because the world for them looks totally different than the world for us. 1989 don't look nothing like 2021 at all. So I have learned to be smart enough to get out of the way and support those who are coming behind me, whether it's through the wisdom of age or the availability of wallet. Get out of the way and let those who know what is needed for the future, let them go forth, and we be their underpinnings, we be their foundation, we be the ones to hold them, hug them, embrace them when they need it. So what do we do? I don't know, but I'm smart enough to get out of the way.
So you're saying we become the platform, or we become the thing that they can spring off of to become all they need to be.
Yes.
So off their shoulders, they become what we are looking for. Okay.
Or just sit on our shoulders when they need to.
Huh. I like that. I like that.
I think the what we do next has to be, at least for me, for someone in my position of privilege, has to be to ask questions rather than offer answers. I need to be in a spot where I don't presume that my whiteness, that my middle classness, that my straight, that all of those privilege pieces that I'm equipped to answer questions, that those things were not just equipped not to answer, but equipped to silence and or oppress, right? So I need to operate out of identities, cultures, social situations that are not a part of my formation. So part of that means need to ask questions, need to submit to leadership that looks different. That's one of the shout out to the Disciples of Christ guy. I'm actually doing my doctoral work at Lexington Seminary because I wanted to work with other folks coming from different traditions, much more diverse in terms of racial, global, sexual and gender identities, all sorts of things, right? Because like my straight white Lutheran mentors, the last 2 degrees I've done, great, maybe not the most helpful for me in getting better, right? So we need to make more of those decisions. this, right? That it's easy to make that decision now. But when we're offered places of privilege and power, maybe it's to say, am I really the best person to fill this slot? Do we need other perspectives? Even if that means that I'm not going to climb that social ladder, right? And trust me, like I'm sitting in a spot with a lot of privilege, and also I know that it will not always be best for my institution to be served by me, right? That there's got to be something and someone else. So back to your point, Guy, getting out of the way, right? Like paving a way, and then doing the John the Baptist thing and stepping aside, right?
Yes, I echo and shout and retweet and all of the things, everything that has just been said. I think the only other thing to add, I struggle with the It Gets Better campaign. One, because Dan Savage, well, that's a whole other panel. Because it's so future focused that we forget about what are we doing to support people right now, and how are we helping people survive right now. And we get so future focused that we forget the present. And so it's been exciting to see signs. The future is queer, the future is Black, the future is feminist. Yes, but the right now is also queer. And the right now is also Black. And the right now is also feminist. And so for me, the question is not what are we doing next? What are we doing right now? And how are we supporting folks in their survival and thriving now? Not just tomorrow. And yes, we need to get out of the way. We should not assume the needs of others. That is not what solidarity is about. But I wrestle with what are we doing now? Because folks are being hurt now. Folks are being killed right now. What are we doing to be in solidarity with those folks? How are we getting out of the way in this present moment? Because the right now is also queer. The right now is also intersectional. The right now is also feminist.
And the church says, amen. Amen. Get out of our way, getting out of the way of the future, and doing work now. Scripture comes to mind and says, now is the time to awaken out of sleep, for the end is nearer than when we first believed. And that used to be an apocalyptic scripture that I grew up with. But recently, I thought about what if that means it's the end of that conflict? What if that means that we need to awaken out of sleep because the future in which we are dreaming is becoming reality because we are moving in faith or in resolve that that's going to be the expected future? I think we can do some good work. I want to thank you all for being here. I appreciate your words, your names, your deeds, everything that is you, and also everything that is the you that we don't know yet. It is so beautiful to have this conversation.